Welcome to Revitalize and Replant. My name is Thom Rainer. I was with Mark Clifton. I don't see it. Mark's camera is disabled. We're gonna bring you back. No, there you are. There you are. I see you now.
I'm here.
I see you.
I'm here.
I'm sorry, Mark. I just for
Yeah.
for a moment. Hey, Mark, before we get started,
I've lost some weight, and so it's a little harder to see me now. I'm not as big as I was, so for a moment there,
Mark,
I turned and you couldn't see me.
In your more agile state, I think you look a bit like Tom Hanks, especially on Castaway with your beard.
Thank you. I think I look like Wilson. That's who I think I look like. So,
well, just remember this: in his entire life, he had a ball.
Oh, there you go. I love it. Yeah, we're here all week, folks. Thank you very much.
Okay. Before, as we concluded last time, Mark, we were talking about your new International Harvester hat.
Yes.
For those who were not in the first of this 3-part series, and I'll review it in just a minute. Talk about the International Harvester hat 2.0.
Yes, for about 4 years, we've had an International Harvester hat that's been sort of the trademark. I shouldn't say trademark. Case IH allows us to do this. People are always freaking out saying, how can you do that? Well, because Case IH said we could do it. We asked him for it. So basically, I wear this hat because it reminds me that Jesus is the International Harvester, and we'll have in the show notes, we'll put the link to the song that talks about Jesus being the International Harvester. So anyway, he's the International Harvester, and the hat just reminds me of that, and it also just helps us.
You got Amy scrambling on that one.
I know it. It just go to.
Hakeem just texted me and said, "What is this song?"
It's Chosen Road International Harvester. You can't miss it. Anyway, so we've given 1,000 of these away to guys and ladies who want to wear them, and they talk about Jesus is International Harvester. I work for him. He'll bring in the harvest. But this is 2.0. I mean, like every year the NFL changes their hats, right? So we decided it was time to change the hat. So we talked to Case IH. We got this hat, and actually it has the NAM logo on the back too. So I'm not going to show it to you right now, but we do have the NAM, and Case IH lets us put the NAM logo on it. We just can't sell the hats, but we can give them away. So if you want to wear one of these 2.0 International Harvester hats and be part of the Cool Kids Club, you can sit at the Cool Kids table at lunch if you wear one of these hats. We'll put it in the show notes, but basically it's replanthatsplural.com. And we'll be glad to send you one. If you'll take a picture yourself, put it on social media, and let people know you love Jesus and work for the International Harvester. How about that?
I love it. We've got it in the show notes, and we'll see if either Hakeem or Amy can find that song. She's found it already. Folks, we're going through a three-part series that actually has 9 components to it, 3 for each of the 3 parts. We're talking about overcoming the greatest fears in church revitalization. Last episode of this, when Mark and I were together, we talked about the fear of failure, the fear of comparisons, and the fear of loneliness. 3 frequently mentioned fears. I also mentioned that we got this information at Church Answer Central. We have about a couple of thousand leaders who are interacting constantly at that place, that digital hub. And we asked them this question, and these were the answers they gave. I did not tally them so that I could rank them, but these were the ones that just were repeated again and again. So once again, inadequacy, conflict, and alignment are the 3 that we'll be discussing today. And some of these are going to be related to there's natural overlap on some of these, but we're still going to talk about them because those who had examples had very poignant examples. And Mark, I mentioned in the last episode, since we record 3 at a time, that you had just returned from Alaska, and the International Harvester 2.0 hat was first now in the hands of Alaskan leaders.
That's right. The very first guys and ladies who got these were in Wasilla, Alaska, and down on the Kenai Peninsula. So they got the first ones, and we're glad to give them to them there. Definitely doing the Lord's work in Alaska. And if you want to revitalize a church, hook me up, because we've got several churches in Alaska. Some of them have been without pastors for 2 years. And it's a great place to go to proclaim the gospel and be a pastor of a church. It's a tough place to live for some folks, but a beautiful place to live for others.
Mark, you were on the peninsula.
Yep. I was on the peninsula, on the Kenai Peninsula.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
That's all right. Go ahead. It's
So
your
when
show.
you were on that peninsula, no, it's actually your show. I'm just here to facilitate. Uh, when you were on the peninsula, any idea how close you were to Russia?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have any idea how close I was to Russia. I'm sorry. I wish
Because
I
in
told
then
you.
the tip of the peninsula, the farthest most island or whatever it
Yeah,
is,
actually,
peninsula,
the
isn't it
furthest
pretty
out.
close?
Yeah, the first is out. Aleutian Island is actually about just straight north of Hawaii. It goes that far west, and then actually the tip up north where the two land masses almost come together. I think it's only 35, 40 miles apart. The United States
Wow.
and Russia up at the very northern part up there.
So
So
I had the right idea of just the wrong geography within
you
Alaska when I
did,
was
you did. But there are some villages out on those Aleutian Islands. One of them is Dutch Harbor, places like that, where the greatest catch, where those guys come and go from. And man,
there. Yeah.
there's some population out there, 14, 1,500 people, and no church. And we'd love to see some churches started out there on the Aleutian Islands. So, man, if that's your kind of thing, hit me up and I can connect you to some folks in Alaska who'd love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, hear that well. I think that's a great ministry opportunity. So hopefully God will be calling some even through this podcast. All right, Mark, let's go through fears number 4, 5, and 6. The overcoming the fear of inadequacy. Man,
Yeah.
I don't know how to go to that. I mean, I feel inadequate as a father, grandfather, husband, leader, writer. You can go on and on and on. But I guess inadequacy and turning around a church that is struggling would not be a surprise.
Yeah, it's just overwhelming. You look at a dying decline. Look, I worry about a guy who goes in with full confidence in himself that I can do this. Man, I can handle this. It's like, no, you probably can't. I mean, this is way beyond your pay grade. It's way beyond my pay grade. To a real degree, Dr. Rayner, it's only when you acknowledge your inadequacy that God can really use you in a way that is beyond your ability to do what you think you can do. But the fear of inadequacy, the fear that I can't do this, I don't have the gift set, I don't have the patience, I don't have the ability. Um, that fear keeps guys away from sometimes the very place God has called them to be, because in your weakness, He's going to be made strong. And so,
Mm.
again, sometimes just the acknowledgement that I have inadequacy is a really good place to start. But the fear that paralyzes you, that keeps you from going, is a bad thing. And it's something the adversary uses to keep us from being part of where God wants us to be. Because when you look at it from a human standpoint, I don't think anybody, we have, Dr. Rayner, we have 13 characteristics we see God use in revitalizing pastors. All right. And there's an 82 question survey we do and the whole bit. Look, 5 is the highest score you can get. If somebody scored 5 on all 13, they're lying, because it's not possible to have all, you couldn't
They
do
have
it.
been disqualified for character failure.
Yeah, really. And some of them, if you're a 5 on one, there's no way you can be a 5 on the other, because that would cancel each other out. So everybody has a limitedness in their gift set, but it's the realization that limited doesn't keep me from what God's called me to do. But for some guys, it does. And just that fear that I don't have what I need, I can't do this, I'm inadequate, and that just paralyzes them, and it keeps them from revitalization. Or once they get into revitalization, they become overwhelmed by all that they're supposed to do and all the challenges they have. And as you've talked about before, rather than just taking the elephant one bite at a time, they just give up and walk away because it's just too big and they don't see any way of handling all of it eventually.
Mark, when I went to my revitalization, like yours was Warner Road, mine was Hopewell in southern Indiana. And I was being interviewed by the search committee. His name was Merle. And Merle was asking me a series of questions. And one of the things he says, "How are you with your hands?" What do you mean? How am I with my hands? I can play some chords on guitar and I can shake. No, no, no. Can you build stuff? You basically you're good at manual labor. And I said, "Why do you ask that?" And he said, "Well, it'd be very helpful if you were." I'm terrible at that. I mean, Nellie Joe wants to hire a handyman to screw in light bulbs. I mean, it is. I'm really bad at manual labor, and the moment he said that, I had this fear going through me. I could see me in this ministry with a hammer in my hand, a saw in my hand, And I could just think, oh my gosh, when I was in a church as a layman, we had an organization called Carpenters for Christ. I never went and carpentered with them. In fact, they never invited me to come. And so thinking about that, that was an immediate fear. And they didn't call me for 7 weeks. I had to preach 6, 7 sermons in a row before they finally called me. And they certainly didn't call me because I had that skill set.
Well, I think Spurgeon one time, if he didn't say it, people have said he said it.
He
But
said it.
yeah, he probably
You
said it.
just say it. He said it.
All right.
It's in one of his books. Just go look it up.
But your strengths can absolutely become your weaknesses because you rely on them too much. So if you're a really good communicator, you're really winsome, you can speak off the cuff really well, then you rely on that too much. And oftentimes, as I said, it's in your weaknesses where you really have to lean into Christ and let Him really show you what He can do through you, and not through your own power. So being in a place of vulnerability is a good place to begin when you replant and revitalize. But at the same time, it makes you fearful. And sometimes those fears actually keep you from doing where God wants you to go and doing what God wants you to do.
Getting so biblical on us. I don't know what I'm going to do with you, Mark. Goodness gracious. Good gravy train. Second one is overcoming the fear of conflict. I have historically had a fear of conflict. Now, once I went to Lifeway and was president there for a dozen years, if most of the fear I had was beaten out of me. So, but that is historically I have not responded well to conflict. That's a natural fear, especially going into a revitalization.
Yeah, and a guy who has conflict avoidance, man, you're going to have a really hard time in a revitalization. One of the 13 characteristics is pastoral grit, which means you can just manage to get through it. You don't embrace conflict. You're not excited for it, but you don't run away from it either. And if you're the kind of person that just doesn't want to deal with conflict, then yeah, you're going to have a real hard time in a revitalization. But I got news for you. You're going to have a hard time anywhere as a pastor. If you think you can pastor someplace and not have conflict, you are sorely mistaken, because the adversary is going to bring conflict your way no matter where you go and no matter what you do. And the quicker you learn how to deal with it in a biblical, redemptive way, the better. And the quicker you learn how not to make it personal on yourself, the better. But there are a tremendous number of individuals who do not want to go anywhere near a revitalization because they say, I don't like conflict. And I say, well, good. I don't want to be around somebody who does like conflict. I mean, I don't want my pastor enjoying conflict, looking for it, and coming out for a fight. Although in 50 years of ministry, I have seen too many pastors who do like conflict and who get all riled up about it. And man, they need to stay as far away from a revitalization as we can keep them. But if you're fearful of conflict, that can also be a hindrance in you going to a revitalization. But you know what? God can work through those fears, and you can find out in that conflict He can grow some things in you you never thought He possibly could, and He can make you the kind of leader you never thought you could possibly be. I have conflict avoidance, and it's not a big deal. Most people do, but man, I just want to run from it. I just want to get away from it. I want to let somebody else deal with it. But I learned a long time ago, Dr. Rayner, it never gets better on its own. And I've never said, man, I should have dealt with that later. Or sooner. I always say, man, I wish I'd have dealt with that sooner. That makes sense. I just messed that up. I never said,
Nope.
I'm glad I waited.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Tell me what I just said. You can say it better than I can.
No, I don't have to repeat you. You did well. You did very well. So you call yourself a conflict avoider. Yes. I don't call myself a conflict magnet, and I certainly was not. But my son Sam, who works with me at Church Answers, has told me from time to time, Dad, I need to go with you or be on that conference call because you confront people too quickly. So I create conflict sometimes, and I don't even realize how forward I am. I was about to say bold, but bold would sound complimentary. Forward, too forward. He said, you start confronting people after getting to know them just a month, and all of a sudden you're confronting them. I didn't know I did that. And so I'm a conflict creator at times, and that's just as bad as being a conflict avoider.
Yeah, conflict avoiders, we want everybody to like us. And we think if we just can get them to like us well enough, they'll eventually agree with us and the conflict will go away. And I got news for you. That's not the way it works, and it doesn't happen that way. But yeah, so between you and I, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's
Well,
probably.
I've transitioned over time, and probably about 1 to 2 years into my leadership at Lifeway. Instead of wanting everybody to love me, I didn't know if anybody liked me. So, and so I finally got to the point where I said, okay, I can handle this. And I've probably gone overboard just a little bit too much on that. So we have
Yeah,
overcoming the fear.
but I don't want to make light of conflict. It can really devastate a person and a pastor because your whole life is you want to serve people and love people and shepherd people, and then it's not the folks on the outside that end up jumping your case. It's the people you've trusted, the people you've given your life to.
Exactly.
You've sat there through their surgeries and you've held their hand when their spouse passed away, and you've been through them through life's most difficult things. And then they turn on you on the stupidest things that don't really matter, and they make huge conflict out of it, and they force you to have to deal with that in a way you don't want to. So look, I'm not belittling that. Some of you are going through that right now. It's a hard part of ministry, but it is a part of ministry, and you're just shepherding them and loving them as Christ loves you. And look, again, it's not something to avoid. It's something to just look at head on and manage and deal with. And if you need help, reach out and get some help from some other guys, other pastors, other leaders to help you understand how to manage conflict. I've had to do that. And actually, in some ways, I kind of, when I come up against something that I don't want to deal with, there's a couple of people that I think deal with things really well. And I would think to myself, okay, how would he deal with this?
Hmm.
How would this person handle this? I want to kind of channel what I've seen in other Christian leaders and how they would deal with it. And that has really helped me move down
Good
the road a
point.
little bit in my conflict management.
This last fear, I originally had it as alignment. I'm going to ask Amy to change it to misalignment. So, if you hear me say alignment, I'm looking at my show notes, and I realize that I need to more put it in the negative because you don't have fear of alignment, you have fear of misalignment, and it goes back to inadequacy. It goes back to fit. It's all those things. How do I know I'm a fit for a church? How do I know I align for a church? And we sometimes presume that all revitalizations are just revitalizations. They are as different as people are different as well. So it's the alignment issue, Mark.
Yeah, and oftentimes you don't align with everybody else because if you aligned with everybody else, you'd be in the same
Good point.
position they're
Good
in,
point.
and you'd all be in the ditch together, right? So, I mean, the whole reason they
Right.
called you to be the pastor to help them get out of the ditch is that you don't align the way they align. So here you are leading the
Yes.
congregation that you're not aligned with. Wow, that's a lot of fun. That's really great. And by the way, they also have conflict. And by the way, you feel inadequate to do the whole thing. So welcome to our world, right? I mean, that's kind of where it is. And just that's just the reality. You have to go in and go. These people are not going to align with me initially. Now, here's the deal. You ready? There are
Yeah.
some places where they do align with you, hopefully. They align with you on the gospel. They align with you on the sovereignty of God. They align with you on the scripture. And those things, it's the methods, it's the way you do church they don't align on. So sometimes you got to lean into those things where you do align in order to find strength in those things where you don't. And we call that being a visionary shepherd. You've got to shepherd these people in order to help them follow your vision. If you
That's
just come
good.
in there with your vision, they're not going to align with that, and you're going to be out there all on your own. But if you'll shepherd them and care for them, in other words, disciple them, eventually they will at least somewhat move toward your alignment. Some of them will never be totally in line with you, but they'll still love you enough to go with you anyway. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. That's called my family, my sons, my wife. We are not totally aligned. So here's one story. You went over a lot of doctrinal issues. Are we aligned on the gospel? Are we aligned on the resurrection? Are we aligned on the exclusivity of salvation through Christ? So recent story. In fact, it happened either this week or last week at the time we're recording. And Pastor basically said, I think I'm going to get fired in his revitalization. And he goes on and tells the story at Church Answers. He came up somehow by discussing with the patriarch that he was post millennial, that he was that he had a different eschatology than the patriarch. It's not in their doctrinal statement. He had been at the church 2 years, if I recall, did not think there were any problems there, and all of a sudden the patriarch's going to call a meeting for his dismissal.
Really? Well,
So
if Jesus
that
comes
is
back before the meeting, it'll all be solved anyway. Then they'll know who's right and who's wrong. So
there'll be a lot of revitalization and other problems that are solved here. But
oh,
yeah, you're right. Most of the time there is doctrinal alignment. There may be secondary and tertiary issues, but most of the time there's doctrinal alignment. Most of the time the misalignment is on methodologies.
but not always. And you just mentioned one there that wasn't. And I could, if you want to read Andy Davis's book, Revitalize, there were some doctrinal differences there. If you read Brian Croft's book, Biblical Revitalization, there was some doctrinal realignment that needed to be done there. So it's not always the case. I'm just saying most of the time there is some basic doctrinal alignment, but sometimes you're going to go to a place where, yeah, there's going to have been some teaching that hasn't been correct over the years, or they've slowly gotten off track. I mean, when Paul told Timothy to remain at Ephesus, the main reason to remain was to teach sound doctrine. So there had to be doctrinal alignment before you could deal with anything else. And so that's what I'm saying. If you've got doctrinal alignment, then you can build on that. If you don't, you're going to have to get that aligned, and that's going to be difficult too. And that's why you need a network of people. You need folks around you like church answers and church replanners and people that can feed into you and care for you and answer your questions and be in a community, because it is hard to be out there in the work that we've been called to do.
We're at Revitalize and Replant. We've been talking about the 9 greatest fears in church revitalization. I encourage you to go back to the first part of this 3-part series, which would be the one with Mark Clifton and me previously. And we talked about the fear of failure, the fear of comparisons, the fear of loneliness. This is part 2 of the 9 greatest fears, and that is inadequacy, conflict, and misalignment. And in our next episode, when Mark and I are together, we'll be talking about 3 other fears. One is impatience. Mark has a lot to say about that.
And
Finance.
I really can't wait to say it either. I'm just
and I just got that. I was so intent on wrapping this up. I just got that. The fear of finance. We talked about that. Particularly, does the church have money? Do I have money? Those are the 2 parts of that. And then the fear of burnout. How do I know that I can last in this church? So those will be 3 good ones to talk about. Mark, you always have a wealth of wisdom, and your sagacity is only matched by your handsomeness. So thank you for the information that you have given us. Thank you, as always, viewers and listeners, for being a part of Revitalize and Replant. Continue to watch us on YouTube if you are, and subscribe there. Continue to listen to us on your favorite app and give us a rating or review, and continue to be a part of Revitalize and Replant, where we're helping churches get healthier together.